because of AFP, French news, French agency, and so on. So that is to say, and even social media and social network have converted to being a news organization. And that's meant that traditional media like television, radio, and traditional media, radio, television, and press are under pressure. And so it's time that we have to think how to regain our independence. And as I said already, here we live in very fast world, breaking news, live coverage, and of course the war is already made in the studio instead of the ground, in the field, in the battlefield, as you said, Clarisse. So time has come. We have to think how to regain, how to shape, how to recover our authority on the media, especially when it comes to our countries. As the leitmotif, the slogan in the last African summit, they say, okay, African problem should be solved by the for African solution. And this shouldn't remain just words, but it should be put into practice and give more impetus, more power to the media throughout the continent. And of course, without having this power, without having this authority, we have this freedom, we have to having all this liberty, we cannot do a lot, because still the media in many parts of Africa are under the threat of commercialization, of businessmen, of course, of authority, political authority, and so on and so on.
Thank you so much, Professor Laida, for that. It is very vital, of course, facelifting the African media and ensuring that interpretation, especially of global events that have a direct impact on what is happening in Africa is concerned. Coming back to you, Conrad, we have a case in hand. I think probably you've been following the news of the recent report. I don't know how it was received in the Western world, probably in Poland, but in Africa we saw a mixed reaction, but we know largely it caused somehow confusion or a whole lot of negative reaction. Patterning the release of this report on All Eyes on Wagner, and we again saw the strategy, how the timing, you know, some proponents who always say that these people are involved in misinformation, or probably using communication or information as a tool to attain an objective. It's always, you know, come as an agenda well planned, and that is what happened this time around, released at the same time, occupying various headlines and on the mainstream media that was actually brought across the African continent. We are talking about this All Eyes on Wagner regarding the recruitment of young Africans by Russia, which it said forcefully sending them to the, you know, to the war front. You are actually very versed with the situation in Ukraine, and probably the state of also volunteering in the special military operation, and all the stakes involved. And how can we actually navigate this, or probably do our, you know, present that type of information that will ascertain the people, the audience, and probably bring some sort of a balance and not conflicts in the minds, as what has already been caused across the African continent, that we see, you know, to a lesser extent might affect the dealings between the continent and its new strategic partner.
Yes, well, first of all, we have to remember about this position of disinformation within the war policy in general. There is the very old joke about Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and Napoleon meeting somewhere in another world, and just looking at the present media. And Alexander the Great said, "Oh, if I had such a tanks and such rifles, I would conquer the world." Julius Caesar said, "Oh, if I had such a technology, these missiles and airplanes, I could be the biggest in the world." And Napoleon just is reading newspapers and watching TV, said, "Okay, if I had such media, no one ever listened about the Waterloo." And that's the point. You have to control the minds to even think about the wars. The main rule is the same, like Orwell said, that who controls the past controls the future, but who controls the present controls the past. So they rewrite whole histories. They change consciousness of the whole nations and generations, like properly Professor Zaglami mentioned. And this information is a part of every war, not only since Vietnam collapse of the American policy, but that it was absolutely typical for every so-called special operation or intervention or peace action from the deep 90s. When we reach already to the war in the desert and invade first struggle between America and Britain and Iraq, we can remember all these informations about mass graves in Kuwait, about the horrifying crimes perpetuated by the Iraqi force. And just after war finished, it was just cancelled and just silenced. Of course, one of the strongest examples in Europe was destruction of Yugoslavia, when the public opinion in the West, in the whole world, was just bombarded by this misinformation, disinformation about, again, mass graves, crimes, genocides, illegally perpetuated by the Serbians. And after all this finished, it just happened, misinformation. It just appeared to be another product of Western propaganda, exactly how it was shown in the Wag the Dog film with Dustin Hoffman, Robert De Niro, when we see war completely created, invented in studio, like Professor Zaglami mentioned about. It was absolutely visible when we seen Ukrainian conflict from the very beginning. We have to remember that the Ukrainian conflict has started with the overthrow of President Yanukovych in 2014 already. It was just coup d'etat managed by the Western politicians, involving also Polish one, like Polish Foreign Minister Radek Sikorski, present in Kiev then, and forcing President Yanukovych to resignation. And from the very beginning, I have to say that Russia failed to acknowledge that this is also very important field of war. And about the soft power of Kiev or Kiev's oligarch was always a step forward before the Russian activity on any kind in the Ukrainian conflict. They always been a bit better and a bit faster in presenting Kiev, so Western, in fact, Western intelligence and Kiev oligarchs, neo-Nazis point of view. And that's exactly what we see now with this new level of misinformation. We have to also remember that in 2022, where the special operation has started, let's remind how it was started. In the couple weeks before the special operation started, whole public opinion had been given misinformation that Russia is preparing to attack, where in fact it was Ukrainian forces, supported by the Western ones, coming forward closer to the People's Republic of Donbass and preparing to attack. And it was very clear operation of misinformation. So Russia was being directly told, you cannot do anything, because if you move just one soldier, we just announce to the world that you have started. So you have to wait, and we just do whatever we want with the Donbas people. That was exactly how it was planned. And it was just question of the fast and decisive reaction of the Russian government to prevent something which could happen easily in Donbass, thus being the next genocide in this area. When you calling about this report and about this misinformation about African mercenary volunteers fighting on the side of Russia, you have to see the wider picture. This is the moment when the Western governments, including the Polish one, officially confirmed that at least 20,000 of the Western mercenaries fight on the side of Ukraine, of Kiev regime, and any kind of, and they have been given abolition from their own governments to fight on the side of Kiev. So they are now officially recognized mercenaries under some kind of protection of the Western government, which is a step forward to direct involvement of the Western governments into this war. So in the same time, they have to cover this information, very official one, and given in the forum of parliaments, Poland, of House of Commons in Britain, they have to cover this misinformation with something new. For example, that on the side of Russia, on the side of President Putin, there are hordes of barbarians coming from Asia, coming from Africa, and just wanting to, conquer the Europe. That's the message, exactly. That's why they love so much this information about Northern Korea cooperation with Russia. That's why they investigate any link between Iran and Russia. And now it's about exactly cooperation between Russia and African countries and African states wanting to finally decolonize themselves. That's the point. And again, they want to be presented as these good guys, the ones with the white hats in the Westerns. So again, they cannot say to the public opinion, okay, we would like to recolonize Africa. They had to say, no, we are protecting Africa from Russians and from Chinese. That's the way how this information works. They always want to present themselves as the good ones. Perpetrators want to present themselves as the victims. Well, I think that Israeli politics is the main example of this kind of misinformation. How perpetrators, how the crime is presented as being a victim. That's the point, and we have to be very careful with such operations.
Indeed, being very careful, especially across the African continent. How do we react to such situations in the same perspective with you, dear Yulia? I would love us to elaborate more on this very aspect. Conrad just highlighted fractured cooperation, and earlier on when you were talking, you probably identified the agenda and of course what aim do they need to attain from this. We can say to an extent that this actually they attained their aim because of the reaction that we saw from the African country government. Others actually trying to see how they can probably bring back the Africans who are involved in the war in Ukraine. Actually, both parties have recruited foreigners, not just from Africa, but from around, like was highlighted by the Russian ambassador to Nigeria. So let's see how this can probably, this Western strategy, which, a soft power strategy of misinformation, or can we say disinformation, can affect the strategic relationship between Africa and the Russian Federation in today's, today's world.
That is exactly the key difference. So when you're talking about Western actors, whatever they do globally, whatever they do in other countries is not meddling, but it's support of democracy. It's not bombing civilians. It's, as it was called in Obama times, collateral damage, and that was the term used by Hillary Clinton as well. While bringing democracy. When you talk about, for example, those issues of recruitment, there was even a funnier example when one of the programs that was aimed at providing education and jobs for African students was called human trafficking, right? So that was done by Russia for one of the by one of the entities in one of the biggest economic zones that actually functions in quite an open and transparent way. But that was called human trafficking when a campaign was launched to provide an opportunity to study and work in the Russian Federation. While when you have other examples that involve forced, let's say, labor mobilization, or when people are doomed to agree to various kinds of bad conditions for work. That is a different thing because that is happening involving the Western actors. So, just like I mentioned, it's all about facts and all about interpretations that are built around them, and the power to bring the point across using the big media outlets. And here, definitely, the West has a monopoly on all of the biggest media, and more like Google and YouTube. So it's a monopoly that is quite impossible to beat, especially when you're functioning within that framework. So there have been quite a lot of talks and quite a lot of scandals around Russian policies in African countries. But the simple facts are that Russia is not as interested in natural resources as the Western countries are, because in Russia itself, most of those resources can be found, and moreover, they're not being used. So the cost analysis for, let's say, exploration in Africa would not really give optimistic scenarios, right?
Sure.
That's number one. Number two, there are no, let's say, strong institutions that Russian institutions that function in Africa, or that are intended to function in Africa in order to control economic, let's say, and financial flows. So when you talk about even small or medium-sized business that is being established between the continent and the Russian Federation, there are many issues that are being faced with transactions, with due diligence, and with many other things, just simply because there are different business cultures, because there are sanctions, and because the financial system itself is not even under the control of some of those African states. I would say there is no country in Africa that fully controls its economic policies, not even to mention the ones of the CFA frame zone. But even if you look at the countries of the south of the continent, most of their big transactions and big, let's say, deals are controlled by the British or the Americans, or both combined. When you talk about the north of the continent, most of the economic policies are controlled by France or other European actors, or, well, depending on the sphere of interest. So even if there was interest in putting big projects with other partners, anyway, it has to kind of go through some kind of confirmation. So it makes it almost impossible to operate even within the say, actual business model. And the discussions of, let's say, Russia recruiting Africans for the special military operation are also a bit, I mean, when you look at it from the logical point of view, what sense does it make to recruit people that are not speaking the language people that are not aware of the technologies and that have never used the same weapons or whatsoever else. So in this kind of a situation, even if it was the case, you would need to take them through quite a long education process. And why would you do that if you have quite a lot of neighbors from the CIS countries that come from a similar background that allows them to, let's say, integrate into even the military operations in a faster way? So logically speaking, even if there was, let's say, the need to recruit foreigners, probably those would be, you know, people from the neighboring countries that integrate into that very system, let's say, faster or in a more effective way. And some of those people living in Russia but not having the citizenship are perceiving participation in the military operation as an opportunity to obtain the citizenship in a faster way. So that's another possible, let's say, motivation, aside for other kinds of motivation that people who try to, you know, join those happenings have. So yes, with all of the allegations, I mean, this in some cases it has been quite ridiculous, because whatever happens, it is just blamed on Russia. Just like the ones I mentioned, the Epstein files, at some point there were articles coming out in the British media that it was actually a KGB project, and that Epstein and the island and whatever was happening there is an Epstein project. And the only proof that they used is that they used the information that Epstein was recruiting Russian models, if I'm not mistaken, in the city of Rostov, and he was officially working with one of the model agencies, and that was considered enough proof to say that the whole thing was a KGB project. So it's very easy to, you know, to keep blaming someone else. And Russia has been in that position for many years by now. Whatever, you know, whatever it does, I think it would still remain more or less the same. And there is the controversy between the West and Russia that results into various and numerous allegations. And the Trump case and his first election was again was said to be the meddling of the Russian Federation. But here we are. It's his second term, and we cannot really say that his policies are benefiting Russia. So why would Russia then try to do that? And even if so, what is the outcome? So I mean, when you look at simple logic in those cases, some of the things become clearer. Yet at the same time, like I said, one little fact, related or unrelated, could be extrapolated just to prove a point, communicated through the media, and that's how it functions.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, communicated through the media, shifting of narratives or opinions and affecting even policies. With you, Professor Laida, we want to look at how this, you know, information warfare has probably indirectly affected and continues to affect narratives around the African continent. We are aware that when the wind of change started blowing and leaders of the Sahel states started taking drastic decisions as to how they need to be in total control of their political, economic sovereignty, and you can name the rest. We saw the reaction from the African Union, the supposed institutional bloc of the African continent that has to defend the interests first of the African people, with all the changes that are occurring, like you said, it's not just about the rhetoric, it's not just about the theoretical statement, but it's about taking practical decisions that will actually propel the African continent. If we can use the scenario of Russia, Africa, and then the West using probably weaponizing Russia in line with the recruitment of African soldiers, let's try to see how the African Union has to define a diplomatic standing that will act based on the realities of the new times, rather than on old narratives which have always shaped decision making across the African continent.
Well, I think regarding the relation between Africa and Russia, from the beginning of this war in February 2022, African countries were having, I would say, not clear position. Why? Because we have seen how the Western media has quickly jumped to this issue and make it as a global one. That's what makes some countries furious about this, I would say, this partial and biased position. And of course, at the same time, there was a war in Gaza, in Palestine, in occupied territory of Palestine, but Western media did not care about that. And because of this double standard of the Western media, so African media were reluctant to support what happened in between Russia and Ukraine. But overall, we see the rift, a big rift between Africa and Western media, and because of that, we spoke about the global South. And of course, in the war between Russia and Ukraine, we are talking about we from the African side, we consider that African, I would say, this war is Western media made. Let's make it this way. It looks as it's a Western media business, not African one, because Western media did not care about what even happening right now in Sudan, in Somalia, in Democratic Republic of Congo, in Great Lakes, and so on. So in Western Sahara. So that's why the problem, if there is a problem, you have to blame the partiality and the bias of Western media, which put aside the concern of African and global South. And from that, we understand that why there is this divided position in many countries. And of course, we have to admit a relation between Africa and Russia has always been supportive, and here in Africa we don't see with the same eyes Western presence in Africa and China or Russia in Africa. The two countries, whether it's Russia or China, in their business trade in Africa, it's based on partnership. Whereas when we deal with Western countries, France, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Germany, United Kingdom, and so on, it's always with this colonial background. And these countries, as I just mentioned, in their way, in their manner of dealing with African countries, they always belittle the African and countries. More than that, they are always putting some condition on the human rights, on freedom of the press. And of course, these concepts, although they are universal, but not necessarily consensual. Freedom of the press, media, I mean, human rights and governance and democracy have not the same meaning in different parts of Africa. When we have people are still starving, sorry, we cannot speak about freedom if they are still hungry. So we have a lot of misunderstanding and misconception, and even Western countries I have to blame for their promoting a very bad negative image. Actually, in many times they consider Africa as the continent of hopeless continent, the dark continent. So we have this kind of logo, this kind of slogan that are portrayed in the media, in Western media particularly, and that's why now we understand in last meeting, the 39 summit in Addis Ababa. Now, all African countries ask for reparation and retaliation from and the repair of justice, social justice, and political justice for countries which were under colonization from Italy, from Spain, from France, particularly Great Britain and Germany. So that's to say, really, that is if we have to blame, of course. We have to blame the media, the Western media, for being, taking side with against African, and certainly they don't accept this way of reporting, and of course in this case. Whether it's China or Russia, they are investing in African countries in the basis of partnership, in basis of in win-win format. So that's exactly why African leaders are so suspicious about this, and if Western countries are not fair enough in their way of reporting, they won't get any support from Africa. And I understand that what is going on now in the war between Russia and Ukraine. I hope we can come to terms and stop this war, and of course solve the problem once forever. Thank you.
Absolutely, it's about understanding how international politics affect even the decision making of a nation, and that is why we want to understand with you, Conrad, the principle of double standards, and still looking at the end result, because when we take a case study like we heard lately the U.S. Secretary of State speaking and saying that it was time for the USA and the European partners not to forget history, but then to be more actually intentional towards having back the rules based on that which actually is no longer feasible in this world of shifting alliances or new alliances, where we have major stakeholders joining the international arena in terms of decision making, policy control, and even the economic deliberations. And this actually attracted a whole lot across the African continent, the global south, and elsewhere in the world. That is just to show the realities. Now a narrative has been created to destabilize or to create confusion in Africa, and probably bring about this confusion to attain the agenda that is defined, especially at this time that countries are being advised to work especially on their security agenda, to ensure some sort of safety because of the uncertainties around the world.
Well, yeah. First, we have to see how this narrative from especially the United States has changed toward African countries. We can now hear from President Trump very aggressive language towards, for example, Nigeria, who, as we all remember, has been just left by the American investors, has been just cheated by them, in fact, and now is presented as some kind of another serious global threat to American security. We have to remember that President Trump mentioned Nigeria just after Venezuela, when he listed the possible targets of the next American operations, Venezuelan-like. Yeah. We have to remember how visibly provoked by Elon Musk involvement was the treatment of the South African president by President Trump. Yeah. So they try to highlight Africa not only as a possible arena of another influence conflict, but as a direct threat to the American or wider Western interests understood globally. So that's how it's very important and very significant for Africa. That of course it's some kind of let's say appreciation of the present African position, but it's of course really hard hazard for African countries. They have to think about themselves as a possible next target of the Americans. So it's absolutely obvious, I believe, for everyone, especially when we remember that American policy is in fact just widened Zionist policy. So when we observe interest of Tel Aviv government in the Northeast Africa, in Ethiopia, in Eritrea, in Somalia, we can see that if Israeli government sees something like possible target or possible arena of realizing own policy, Americans just came and do that, manage that for the Israelis. That's how it works. That's what we can see, for example, also on Iranian issue. This is the problem not of Americans at all. That's just the ideological point of view of Bibi Netanyahu. That's why we have all this increasing American presence around Iran. So that's what we have to absolutely remember about. One important thing Julia mentioned about resources. Yes, of course, someone accusing Russia of an intention of steal someone's resources must be just mad. That doesn't know how potentially rich in resources Russia is. Whatever we are talking about, rare earth elements or natural gas or oil or anything else, including gold and uranium. But we have to also remember that in fact we are now in the very beginning of the future conflict for resources. And it's not only the point who gain them, but the main purpose of such a policy is to prevent other powers, our competitors, to control them or to have any influence of their usage. So that's why we look at Africa as well. And I think that the most important is to cut any links, any cooperation between Africa and China especially, because we have to remember that the main competition, the main conflict, which will define present stage of the geopolitical affairs is between United States and China. Sure. And Africa as a potential Chinese partner in this competition. As these African countries who has very successful experience of cooperation with China are potential American and British, French and other targets, because they want to prevent what is I think unavoidable for now, that is gaining the very first geopolitical dominant position in the global economy and finally in politics as well by Beijing. And Africa could be easily element of this necessary human victims of such a conflict between the United States and China.
Absolutely, and of course the agenda is quite bigger and complex. now that you see probably that the war for control probably of resources, of position and even power is being fought right down to the African continent using this misinformation, disinformation at the same time. Earlier on with you, Julia, we highlighted that just a radio announcement in 1994 caused the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. We also have a case where the Western media used the Operation Colonna to, weaponize the leadership of President Denis Sassou Nguesso. We also see scenarios where, African leaders are being termed a despot, especially those preventing infiltration of, of the sovereignty, political and economic sovereignty of respective nations. Now it is clear those are realities, but then it is always imperative to derive a strategy to be able to move forward. So in your own perspective, what do you think can Africa put on the line as its soft power tool to be able to counteract all of these and also ensure that Africa safeguards an African communication that will protect, first of all, its interest and of course, which will lead to better interpretation of highly politically motivated information campaign that directly links to the African continent and its new partners, particularly in the global south?
I think now we are observing a major renaissance of Pan-Africanism, meaning that people are becoming more and more aware and conscious about where they come from and about global processes as they are, without the ribbons and decorations that were put on them by the colonial and neo-colonial powers with their methods. And I think social networks are playing a great role in this, because once you compare the information that you get from people, from the ground, and the information that comes from the major media outlets, you actually see the difference. And Rwanda, an example that you made, well, they have changed their policies after the 1990s. To make communication, or let's say official communication, more strict and controlled, because what was coming to the global news, the reports that were coming to the global news were not actually reflecting the situation, and the following, let's say, years were defined by, again, continuing to misinform the audiences on the situation in Rwanda. So one of Rwanda's greatest achievement is that after the hell basically that broke out loose over there in the 90s, they managed to rebuild the country. They managed to facilitate reconciliation process. And you see that the country now is actually doing well comparing to many of its neighbors, even though it again has to maneuver between the interests of global powers. It has to maneuver a lot in its foreign policies. And it has to, of course, try to find other strengths. As the country is relatively small, only 10 million of population, and it doesn't have as many resources as some of its neighbors, let's say, and it's definitely using other methods, but they're great at security, and they're great in IT sector. They're great in many other things that have allowed them to restore normal life, just let's say 10, 15, 20 years after the country was a complete there is no other word but hell that I can use, because the genocide took millions of lives away, and people didn't even understand what was happening, why it was happening. but the streets were just bleeding, right?
Sure.
So Rwanda is one of those examples that shut down, and in terms of communication as well, and it managed them to, and it allowed them to rebuild the country from within. Yet now the situation is changing, as I mentioned, is changing greatly because of the social network, because of accessibility of information, because of different points of view that can be presented on social networks. And I think it plays a huge role um, in the way that many people actually see political processes and define them. Because, for example, when Angela Merkel was the Chancellor of Germany for almost 20 years, it was okay. When Erdogan is running Turkey for more than 20 years, that is sometimes okay, sometimes it is not. But once you have someone in Africa who's there in place for more than 10 years, that is definitely a dictator. When you have Bill Clinton as the president of the United States, and then you have Hillary Clinton running for presidency, that is okay. That is not nepotism, there is not corruption. And of course, she was doing it because of her own achievements and not because her husband was the ex-president. When you have George Bush Sr. and George Bush Jr., that is okay. That is democracy. There is no issue. But once you have a similar case in some other country where a son is as active in politics as his father is, that is nepotism, dictatorship, and abuse of power, and call it whatever. So the double standards are actually all over the place, and with social networks, the exchange of information, the exchange of opinions is not anymore monopolized, even though, of course, the issues of trust are different. And in many cases, social networks just duplicate what is being spread by the major media, yet at the same time, it in many cases allows to have a breath of fresh air, or at least to have some alternative points of view being presented on smaller platforms. Another issue that we haven't yet brought up, but is still still important, and it plays a great role now, and its role will be progressively increasing, is the AI and content generated by AI, because AI learns using particular models, and it basically recreates the very same information that it was taught on, just like human beings teach and learn. Uh, but the issue we're facing already is that there could be masses of information that have something false at the very core. And with the amount of duplicates created by artificial intelligence, quite soon it will be really hard to find alternative, let's say, information in this ocean of similar pieces of content. And that's another threat, and we already see it happening quite a lot. We already see that many of the scholars are using AI, and this is how the science could be going to a dead end when the same information duplicates and creative thought is not appearing, and AI sometimes takes information not even intentionally false, but maybe information with mistakes in it, and then it bases all of its further analysis on something that was initially quite corrupt. And of course, human beings have the same flaws. And as the history was developing, there was less knowledge, less access to information. But the risk of today's world is that the amount of that information, those could be millions, if not billions, pieces of content daily, right?
Sure.
So that is many times more than the human beings ever produced. And this is an ocean that is easy to drown in.
Indeed, a process that is easy to drown in, which actually aligns with the statement that information warfare actually leads to manipulation of information, which is trusted by the target, of course, without the awareness of the what it intends to attain at the end. That is just to see many international fights, highlighting Africa. The African continent doesn't actually stand alone, but then is at the same time a target. So with you, Professor Layit Zaklame, I'm coming back to you. Let's try to see how this manipulation has created some sort of confusion and, of course, polarization in the media landscape, to the fact that the process of gatekeeping has been is deteriorating, and of course bringing about the vulnerability of states across the African continent, because we are aware that in spite of the situation, there is always need to protect some vital information that, if released, can make a state vulnerable to either direct confrontation like war, or probably indirect, or some sort of soft power maneuvering that can endanger more the country rather than protect, as often been the case.
You are right, Clarisse. That's what we have been watching and witnessing for so many years. Africa is at the mercy of what the media landscape all over the world, dominated by the Western, is portrayed. As I just said to you, Africa is portrayed in very negative way, in very negative manner. And of course, the complicity of the media is there, of the Western media. What I want to say, I want to say that while the media, Western media, claim that they are impartial, they are objective, they are professional, they are transparent, but when it comes, this is for themselves, their own society, their own communities. But when it comes to the rest of the world, and particularly those who do not get along together, like China, like Russia, like what we call the global South, and particularly the African country, they are very cynical. They are very negative about the image they are trying to, and of course they always portrayed these countries as disastrous. And this is very bad for we don't have, I mean, people in the African feel that they don't have fair treatment, exactly fair treatment from Western media, and consequently they don't go along with, they won't accept. And that's why so many experiences now in Africa, in some African countries, in terms of media, professional and so forth, have been successful, as I mentioned already. But it's always nice to repeat, to recall in Western, I mean, in South Africa, in Kenya, in Ghana, in Nigeria, also in Ethiopia and elsewhere. So there is really, as the panel has said, there is awareness that we do not expect from Western media to be indulgent, because they are using the media as a tool, as a tool of war, to misinterpret, to belittle, to misinform the world about this continent. But on the other hand, at the same time, they want to get the African resources. They want to get African raw materials and mineral waters and so forth. So exactly this kind of way of reporting and covering does not work anymore, because African are now aware of of this manipulation. And I think the results, the outcomes of the 39th summit last 2 weeks explain that there is really a positive prospect for the future of the continent, bearing in mind they have some promising projects, like as we have already known, Agenda 2063, African Continental Free Trade Area. Then we have all this work done, activities done by different regional economic community and projects, like we have now in Algeria, for instance. For the first time in the history of this country, we just inaugurate a railway worth 950 kilometers from deep of the south and to the north in the west part of Algeria in Oran. And there are other projects for setting another railway train from Algiers deep to Tamnarast. And this is about 2,000 kilometers deep in the south of Algeria, which goes even beyond the frontier with of course, with Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso. And equally and optimistically and realistically, we have the visit, the last 2, 3 or 4 days, the visit of the president of Niger, who came to Algeria. And from this prospect, there was possibility to restart this oleoduct project for gas, which comes from Nigeria through Delta Niger and Algeria, then to Europe, to Italy and other countries. So there is a lot of the equation is completely reversed. We don't think always from the western and the north. Now it's from the south, which is taking the initiative, which is taking the lead and initiating projects that are for benefit of a good rapprochement or positive partnership between Africa and Europe, and particularly countries in the southern part of Europe.
Now, of course, we still highlight that the primary goal of this information warfare is usually to change narrative or to shape narratives, and that is why we have other principles like psychological operations, dissemination of information with the aim of changing how a nation reacts to a particular event. And we are going to use still the case that you are familiar with, Conrad Rekes, the Ukraine war and the position of Hungary. Lately the European Union made the world to understand that they can survive without Russian energy or gas, and of course setting a deadline. And today we saw how some countries actually protested that, particularly Hungary, and we quite also recall that its prime minister said that Ukraine is not actually fighting for Europe and is still against Ukraine's accession to the European Union, saying it will bring the war to Europe and indirectly, or to extort money, as we want to bring again the corruption scandal that will always surround such scenarios. So now let's try to understand the practicality of Europe being independent of this very valuable resource by the year 2027. Can we say it's some sort of this information warfare or misinformation just to affect or maybe change public perception and behavior, especially away from Europe, making the the European Union still to have again some sort of relevance, even though the realities on the ground are showing something else?
Yeah, I think that it's a very good example of how disinformation works. Because when we look into the European relation between Russia and Europe, in the field of energy, especially cooperation, we can see how attitude from the European countries has changed even before the special operation has started. We have to remember that in fact the very first increase in prices of energy has been observed as early as in September 2021. So it was 5 months before special operation has started, and it was totally unrelated to the situation in Ukraine or wider in the post-Soviet areas. It was only caused by the financial operations, in fact partly linked to the energy transformation of the Western economies, but mainly because of the widening usage of the speculative financial tools like ETS, all these payments made and increased within the system of energy transformation of the West. And again, all these propaganda operation to explain and justify increases, very visible and very hard to maintain for the people, increases in the energy prices, had to be justified by some kind of higher moral reason. And in fact, special operation, the full-scale war in Ukraine, which has been provoked by the Western governments and the support for the Kiev plans of aggression against Donbass, all this propaganda and disinformation action was one of the purposes of that was just to cover these speculative and purely financial operations leading to the increase of the cost of life for many inhabitants of Western Europe. And we now observe, after 4 years, we just observe consequences of this transformation, this transition. This general shift from Russian natural gas was a big shock for the European economies, especially German ones. German energy transformation, Energiewende, was based on the constant supply of the Russian natural gas. So it has to be first attacked within the hybrid war as an element of unmoral support for Russia in this war, which was absolutely nuisance. And then after this preparation, there was direct attack, terrorist attack against the Nord Stream, against the Russian-German gas pipeline under the Baltic Sea. So we see how hybrid war is strictly connected with the real full-scale war and terrorist attacks, and using the military forces also. So they are absolutely interlinked. So when we see present position and this constant decision of the Western European countries, this coalition of willings who would like to continue this war at least till next year, as long as this last 90 billion loan for Kiev could last to buy another golden toilet seats for Ukrainian oligarchs. So it's still very comfortable, very convenient for them to explain any elements of economical crisis, any problems in the West, as just justified because of the higher moral reason that means supporting Kiev regime. Hungary and Slovakia as well are the only states which are dissolving from this political approach towards Russia. They want to stand on the positions of the raison d'état, their national interests, and they are of course completely different than the interests of the political and economical elites of the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. So that's why, for example, how important is for the present stage of this Western transformation, how important are Hungarian parliamentary elections, which are to be held on April 2026. How important for the whole, in fact, this part of the globalized establishment, how important are elections in very small European countries. We observed that previously, for example, with direct interfering of the Western European states in election in Romania. We observed that with direct intervention, not only propaganda one, but directly political one, in elections in Moldova. So, in fact, even the small countries, not only in Europe, but also, of course, in Africa, are the battlefields of this hybrid war. This hybrid war for the future of let's say about how global affairs would look like in the next couple decades. Because in fact, when we see this attitude of Western elites and Western media against present Hungarian government, we observe the same elements of negative propaganda as we know, as we read what mentioned Professor Zagami, when the Western establishment mass media write and record about, for example, alliance of Sahel states, about the presidents of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. They present them in the same way, you know. We know this language. They are bad guys, and we are the ones with the white hats. It's exactly the same methods, even if some small elements has been changed. And one element at the end, the most I would say not obvious things in this whole great operation, including elements of society transformation and financial speculative movement, is why in the same moment Western European countries are in line of collision with Russia and with China in the same time. Because in fact, when we all, you know, it's very easy to understand that for it was absolutely in favor of all the sides to continue cooperation between Europe and Russia in the field of especially economy. But okay, European states and European governments decided just to cut these lines and just to shift toward energy transition. Okay, but again, it's very hard to imagine energy transition of the Western Europe without cooperation with China, because that's the main source of the technologies and rare earth elements in the present world. But again, Western governments didn't want to reconcile with China. They want to keep the line of conflict, ideological mainly one. So what is the purpose, apart from just being alienated elites governing terrorized and manipulated societies? It's still hidden. So we can only guess why these people are doing something which is as obviously against the best interest of the Western societies as well.
Indeed, and from all that we can actually say that in spite of what is happening, there is need to define what national interest is all about to ensure that at the end the stakeholders are not serving the interest of the selected few and probably putting a whole lot of people in a state of vulnerability as far as this information war or manipulation is concerned. We are going to run off now with what to know and what to take, especially along the decision-making tables, starting off with you, Professor Laïd Zaklami. We have actually analyzed the tactics of hybrid information warfare, understanding what it is and the agenda and probably Africa's position. But then we need to move from the rhetoric, so the theory, to the practical state. Of course, governments across the African continent are already taking some independent decisions, actually, you know, regardless of the consequences. We want to quote the president of Ghana, John Dramani Mahama, who called on the African states to encourage the use of the Pan-African payment system and, move away from the dollar. And I think the effect of this is still the information shaping narratives that actually tag the dollar as the highest currency. Now it is, about being practical. So in your own perspective, Professor Laida, what do you think should be the agenda of the communication agenda for the African continent along lines of politics, journalism and communication as a whole, and diplomacy and other stakes that can help achieve the defined agenda for Africa in a multipolar setting?
Yes.
Go on, Professor.
I think I'm confident that Africa. Yes, thank you, Clarisse. What I am saying, Africa is. I'm confident that Africa is recovering slowly but surely and gradually its independence in a very large scope and meaning, and they are now aware of the challenge they have been facing. We will not, I think this is my conviction, Africa will not be recolonized again, that's for sure, because we have vibrant elite, vibrant leader all over throughout the continent, and therefore they are aware of the tactics that used by Western countries in manipulation and in disinformation and so forth. So I think they have now they have been setting different projects for strengthening their own unity and own cooperation, because they have the human resources, they have the raw material, they have the political will. So all the conditions are in their hands to really negotiate on a better position, on a good position. And now I'm confident that all the action they have been taken and measure and the resolution they have been adopted, they all are moving towards reinforcing, unifying African countries in order to be to speak one voice in the world affairs. And of course, Algeria, as part of an active member of African Union, and is working very hard to enable African countries to speak one voice in the world affairs. More than that, to have an impact on the world affair and on the international relation. And I am confident it's just a question of time, because in the end of the day, we have all the assets to succeed. Thank you very much, Clarisse, and for your panel.
Thank you so much for that, Professor, and thank you for your great insight with you, dear Yulia. It is actually crucial and a pivotal moment for African countries, and particularly the Russian Federation in terms of solidifying security, diplomatic cooperation, and other areas that that needs to move away from the traditional rules-based narratives or other in order to present Africa, like Professor just mentioned, as a main stakeholder in world affair, in decision making. I think recently the United Nations Secretary General actually Secretary of States noted this while attending the African Union Summit.
Yes, the current policies and the role that African countries are already and will be occupying in the global arena is definitely changing a lot, and many of it is a direct outcome of the previous, let's say, period of time with realization and awareness added to it that everyone is interested in the African continent, and it is to a great extent the future of the global community itself, given the demographical characteristics, given the resources. So now it comes down to the change of management system, let's say. And by this, I mean not the governance within the continent, but this as well, of course. But by this, I mean a different role played at the global arena. So the UN, for example, even though there were quite a lot of flaws and it has lost quite a lot of its actual power in terms of conflict resolution in the first place, but yet it is the only international institution of the kind at the moment that serves as the platform for all the countries to come together. And the role that is played by African countries there is increasing, and I'm sure will be increasing even more. But this is becoming quite an outdated mechanism or institution. So I think that the future of the international relations with African countries playing a greater role in them will be defined by new alliances and by new policies accepted first at the country level or regional level, and then taken up to the global arena. We already see a lot of changes in policies happening in the central part of the continent, and the alliance of Sahel countries is definitely something that France, for instance, or European countries weren't expecting, but this is how diversifying partnerships and this is how changing the regional policies allows to actually say a loud word at the global arena and to make this word be heard by everyone, pretty much. So yes, I think, well, for the African continent, the future is much brighter. But in terms of partnerships, of course, everything will be defined by the types of partnerships being offered and by the types of cooperation being offered. If that would be mutually beneficial, then we can see development. We can see development, and we will be able to see, let's say, evolution happening within the continent and outside of it. But as Professor Laid just said, it probably won't be possible to go back to the paradigm that many countries have already at least attempted to jump out of. So those processes will definitely lead to a new paradigm at the global arena, and the faster the realization comes in, the faster it will actually happen.
Absolutely, and it is about intentionality and how this will actually help propel the respective nations across Africa and elsewhere. We end with you, Conrad. We are looking at this, what to know on the part of the media. We ensure that when political communication is important, diplomatic communication also is important. But then the role of the media cannot be relegated or undermined in ensuring that we curtail the negative effects of this hybrid information warfare, which is a very active tool this time around, given the presence of AI and even social media and access to the internet. So what do you give us an advice, especially to journalists or media practitioners, or probably even communication experts who are still not aware of the traditional global processes and how they can, give another alternative in terms of interpretation to the events happening at the global arena?
To be aware and conscious receiver of any kind of information that allow us to exclude misinformation and recognize disinformation. Another term popularly used in the theory of disinformation, that's Golitsyn's scissors, named after higher KGB officer who defected to the western side, and one of the theories of the disinformation described the situation when the first element of disinformation techniques is to create big lie. So, for example, like Julia mentioned, that there are no Epstein files at all, that there was absolutely nothing wrong with the knowing Epstein. It was just purely business relations between him and Western elite. That was the first line, main one for the last couple years. And then you have quickly create counter lie, another one which helps you to cover the truth. So we know exactly that now this counter lie is okay, Epstein affair is real, but it was created by the Russians. Yeah. We all know that all the links of Epstein goes to Mossad, but we have to, of course, believe in this counter lie that it was, Russian inspiration. So that's the perfect example how it works. And now we have a lot of new media created directly by the same elites, but the same intelligence agencies which control the mainstream media. And they pretend to be independent. They pretend to present a different point of view. They pretend that they offer us some hidden truth about the international or internal affairs of the world, but in fact they are just increasing this informational fog over us. That's the smoke curtain over the real world affairs. And still, so we have to be really, really careful when reading or watching or finding these so-called independent sources, because in fact they are just another tool. That's the counter lies. That's another blade of these Golitsyn scissors, and it is very important. And another element, what Professor Zaglami mentioned, is cooperation. It is not accident not incident that all, for example, interest of main Western media about Africa is to prevent cooperation of African states. That's why, for example, I don't know, President Traore is one of the main black characters for the Western media. They want us to prevent any kind of cooperation. That's why, for example, they invented the story of the Africans recruited by Russians. So it was okay, don't cooperate with Russians because they send you to war. That's the simple message sent also to the African audience. That's the very simple advice for us. If they are afraid, they are scared by our cooperation, we have to cooperate. That's the answer.
Absolutely, the world has to cooperate, but cooperate mutually, as we are facing the state of multilateralism. We are in the state of a multipolar society, and it brings us to that position where each power has the right to cooperate with any country of their choice, given that the national interest is not at stake. And that is why we still ask this question, particularly to African stakeholders, to re-examine, to look deep, to see if actually weaponizing the Ukraine war in terms of recruitment of African youths to fight in the front line is actually a psychological operation or some sort of a desperate revenge against African revolution, African sovereignty. And it is on that note, ladies and gentlemen, that we are going to close today's edition of Global Insight, while thanking our panel of experts for the clarity or in-depth analysis highlighting key terms. And we want to note that where there is an information warfare, we know that there is a strategic agenda, and it is imperative for any stakeholder to analyze if actually you are a target or probably you are being used to attain another level. And it brings us again to underlining that It is all about the interest, national interest of the people and not for the selected few. It brings us again to see that there is need for a strong political will, particularly across the African continent, to be able to withstand the complexities of the international dynamics or global affairs. Thank you so much, and it is on this note that we draw the curtains while wishing you a blissful or wonderful weekend in the company of programs on your Pan-African media. Bye-bye for now.